In the world of so-called spirituality, there's always a reservation about sexuality. Sometimes they use big harsh words such as chastity is life and sexuality is death, and brahmacharya in the yoga tradition, it can mean many different things, but generally it's understood as no sex. And so it's interesting to see that generally in spiritual traditions, sexuality is considered as something sinful meaning not advantageous to your growth. And then you look at the flip side and you see how modern people live it, which is full of debauchery and unsacredness, would be the word. And I've explored both. So I've explored living the modern life, going out, trying to pick up, sometimes picking up, getting good at picking up, trying to be in interaction with women and trying to get some pussy as fast and quick as possible. It's essentially being careless with your sexual energy. But even that is already profound. Sexual energy? I just want to come. Sexual energy, right? And then I had all kinds of experiences, and at some point something in me kind of like stopped and said, I've had enough. And I couldn't have tell you essentially why, at least at the start. When I got older and more mature, I started to understand. But it's like, no, I don't want this anymore, because it's somehow, some way, my life as a whole, when I'm in that lifestyle, that mindset is creating a lot of suffering. And I can't understand why I'm suffering. I can't put the pieces together. It takes a lot of maturity for a human being to realize the consequences of their actions. And it sounds simple, because everybody knows if I push you, you move. If somebody pushes me, I move and whatnot. But no, it's not true. Most people have no sense of the consequences of their actions. Those who do, maybe it's at the surface. But once again, when we consider yogic traditions and when they speak of karma, which is technically action, and the scope of it, your average person who kind of has a sense of his consequence of his action cannot grasp what it really means and how deep it goes. Anyways, all this to say, so I went from that world. I didn't know I was in a particular world, and meaning I didn't understand. I wasn't conscious. But when I'll just say the spiritual world comes at me and presents me these absolutely polar opposite ideals, it's very shocking. And for some reason I say, I'm going to adopt this. This must be the path to God and the path to freedom and the path to truth and whatever you want. So then I lived this for some time. And I realized I was suffering also. And I was realizing it's not, something is dishonest. So the question was, how do you know if you're sexually mature? I don't know if that's what exactly your question. It kind of sounded like this, but, or how did I know I'm sexually mature? It's not that. It's that at some point I started to realize there is a thing called sexual power. At some point I lived it here in modernity, spending carelessly, interacting, mixing with all kinds of people, not realizing the implications. Over here it's like fasting. So fasting can be extremely violent for you. In fact, most people that fast end up twisting something in their system. But the very fact of fasting also confronts you to, well, you don't have the outlet, so it confronts you and shows you something about yourself. But then I started to repress and start to become neurotic to a certain degree, to a good degree. What it made me realize is that there's a thing called sexual energy, which I didn't really grasp. And maybe here and there, sometimes you could read about it, but I didn't really get it. Like, what is sexual energy? What does it mean to be sexual? I had no idea, because for me, sex is, there's a girl, she got a nice ass, I want to fuck her, I want to come, I want to prove to myself something, right? It's very shallow. Or sex is bad because I want to know God, which is a concept, but you believe in that concept because it is the highest truth, and you use this as a weapon to shield you from modernity. So anyways, at some point it dawned on me that there's a thing called sexual energy, and I can't escape it. Here I use it recklessly, and here I pretend I don't have it. Yet it's everywhere, it's always infiltrating, it's always, even if you repress it, it's still doing what it's got to do, but now it's disguised. To go to an ashram, which is a place where so-called spiritual people go, where everybody, generally, sexuality is considered as a taboo thing, or it's not so good, you shouldn't do it. So everybody is becoming neurotic. And to start to observe now, contrary to here, we just go to the club and women are just like, bleh, everything's in your face and it's vulgar, and then people are drunk and people rubbing each other, and you go to the after hour scene where it's just like total opposite, right? And then you observe how people are, no, the energy is still there. It's just hidden now. And the hypocrisy of it. It's always there, always doing its thing, always trying to get something, always manipulating. Doing this, technically it's doing exactly the same thing here, except here it's far to the right and here it's far to the left. So I said, there's no escaping. What am I going to do? On this side, modernity, I suffered, and on this side, I suffered. I'm not sure in which world I suffered more. But one thing is for sure, there's a thing called sexuality, sexual power. I don't understand it. I have no idea what it is. It seems that everyone is scared about it. On this side, so-called spiritual side, nobody wants to talk about it. In fact, at one time I was part of I'm sorry, I use spiritual organization. I got to do it like this because anyways, I was part of a spiritual organization, and they were having a retreat with teenagers who were coming from Los Angeles and the city, right? So I said, okay, we should have a workshop on sexuality, because in that organization, they were promoting chastity. I'm like, you have teenagers that are coming here and you want to talk about chastity? Are you stupid? I didn't say that out loud, but that's what I said. And they got very upset at me. That was the end of my relationship with our organization, at the time at least. It was like, what is this? Right? It's madness. But they're scared and they're terrified of it. And when you go on that side, although they look like they're emancipated in their sexuality, the reality is that they're terrified of sexuality, and their response is to, when you're intimidated by something, you attack it. And it seems that you're not intimidated, but you are. You compensate by overflexing, you compensate by tensing yourself up and jumping into something so you don't feel it, and therefore you're not vulnerable. So I saw both ends of the spectrum, and I was, at the end of the day, whatever you do is not my business. I care about myself. So I said, there's an issue. For myself, I have an issue. I'm looking for an answer. I want to know what this is, because there's no escaping it. And let us pretend that chastity is life, and nobody really knows what the word chastity means, which we can describe at another point in time. But if your average person will send chastity meaning no sex, there's way more to it than that. And that sexuality is death. Well, what does death actually mean? How do you even discover what so-called chastity is and what sexuality is if all you're doing is running away? You can't even understand the deeper spiritual implications of these so-called words, because all you do is scared. You're running in one direction or you're running in the other. So that became very clear to me after some time, after going crazy. I said, I don't want to do it like this. And there was another thing, and I'd like to share it with you if you don't mind. There's a movie that came out in 1999. Some of you will know it. It was Fight Club. I watched Fight Club. I went to the cinema to watch it 11 times with my buddy. We smoked a lot of pot. You can imagine we had nothing to do. And then I had a CD burnt. And when I was in uni, it was on 2 CDs. So I'd watch the same one CD over and over and over every time I had lunch. So I cannot tell you the number of times I watched it. And I related to that movie very much, like many people who watched it. And there's a specific scene, it's the car scene towards, let's say, 3/4, 4/5 of the movie, towards the end, let's say. And they're in the car, and the homeboy Tyler Durden, played by Brad Pitt, is going to put them through a test. The test is, we're in a car, and I'm not going to drive. I'm not going to hold the steering wheel. Just stupid things, right? But there's a deeper meaning to it. And he asks the question, name one thing you wish you would have done before you die. And I would play the exercise all the time. Right? And at the time in 1999, I was a pothead. But I watched the movie so many times in 2002, 3, 4, 5, 6, when I was in another phase of my life when I was supposedly a spiritual person. And every single time the question was asked, my answer was, fuck. Name one thing you wish you would have done before you die. Fuck. I'm supposed to say, discover God. Whatever, some kind of bullshit like this, right? Be more kind. Something like this, right? And me, it was systematic, and I was like, right? Because I'm trying to be a spiritual dude, right? So I'm like, this is not working out for me. Luckily, nobody hears my thoughts. But I was very confronted that. And I said, at some point I realized, okay, you can't escape this. And I believe, to answer your question, because the question isn't so clear, but I believe that the onset of sexual maturity comes at a similar juncture. When you understand that there's a deep fear of sexuality and that how you've dealt with it. Either you've acted chaste. I wasn't chaste, I had been traumatized because of sexuality. It's not sexuality that traumatizes you, it's got a power, you don't understand the power, you use it and it creates consequences, and these consequences burn you. So then you associate it to sexuality or to women or to men, depending on where you're at, right? And then you want nothing to do with that. So I became spiritual, but a person who doesn't become spiritual just has no sex, it's equivalent, isn't it? Right? So you can go in that direction. On the other side, you can just go all out crazy, drink, take drugs, whatever version of that you want. But fundamentally, there's a fear. And the moment you start to realize that these two approaches, supposed chastity, or I don't want to have sex, or I want no sex. And today they have like a sexual genre of a person who doesn't have sex, right? They have like your heterosexual, homosexual, lesbian, and then there's a version of, I don't know what it's called, the ones who doesn't have sex but only in their minds, right? Whatever. Yeah, I know exactly what they mean, by the way. So the moment that it starts to dawn on you that there's no escaping sexual power, because it's the generative power at the base of our human experience. Not only that, it's the sexual generative power that is at the very base of healing, which is my primary field of interest. So it's like, how are you going to heal if you don't have generative power, something that births new, right? So there's no escaping. So at the moment this starts to dawn on you, then the door of humility opens, because you realize you're scared. And you should be. But people don't want to, no, I'm not scared of sex, so they jump into it, or they tend to try to avoid it. No, you're scared shitless. And that brings us back to what I was saying at the start. There's a saying in some spiritual traditions that says chastity is life and sexuality is death. Indeed, sexuality is death. And you can understand it in so many ways, such as it's horrible because death is horrible, or you can actually understand it as the reason there is sexuality within us as human beings, it is because we live in a world of time, and in time, form dies. There's a direct correlation between sexuality and death, because sexuality, the real definition of sexuality, the real meaning of it is reproduction, give birth again. And you don't give birth again unless you die. If there is no death, sexuality as we know it wouldn't exist, would it? So there's a direct correlation between sexuality and death. This is a huge subject on its own. So what I see and what I've noticed and what I did myself, I saw all my friends, and then I witnessed, I don't know, countless thousands of people. I spent a lot of time meeting all kinds of people. I went out, I traveled the world. Everybody, most people are dealing with sexuality in the same way. They're scared of death. They are scared of sexuality, the power of it, which means, remember, as I said, if sexuality is the generative power, it's what births things, which means if I birth something, it creates a consequence, therefore I'm responsible for the consequence I've birthed. And as you can see, the world we live in is trying to do everything in its power to avoid taking any accountability or any responsibility for the power that nature has given them. So I believe that the onset of sexual maturity comes at that point. Now, I don't know what story and how you got to it. Mine is a particular version. Maybe you found a shortcut. It doesn't really matter how you got to realize I got a thing with sex. And you should. Everybody does. And for the first time, you realize, no, this is something. This is a special power. And this is not a toy. And this is not a game. And all the suffering I've created, literally the word is, all the suffering I have created for myself as I birthed my states of mind are due to the misuse of that power. And that the solution, well, for some people the solution is becoming a child again, like a lot of spiritual people who are just asexual. They're lying to themselves. And why would God give you sexual power if He wanted you to be a child forever? That's totally pointless. Anyways, that's each one compensates in their own way, but it's that middle point. I'll tell you another story. So it takes some time to get to that place of maturity. If you're guided, it can go faster. But this is a pinnacle moment in my life, a turning point. I had a friend, and I've said this story to those of you here, some of you know the story, but I had a friend of mine, he had AIDS. Notice I did this, right? In his brain he had AIDS. He was a homosexual. He was a special dude. Forget that he's a homosexual. We had some kind of kinship for a couple of years. I would see him once in a while. He was part of a spiritual organization I had frequented before, and once in a while we would touch base. And at some point I had to write a thesis or a memoir for one of my many diplomas, and I decided to do it on AIDS. So then I contacted him, and that's how our relationship rekindled for some time. And then one time, and he was a special dude. He was very honest. And he had gone through the whole healing, trying to heal. He wasn't like 20, he was maybe, 55 at the time. Maybe I was in my late 20s, early 30s. It's been a while. He's dead now. And we were sitting down, so he had gone through the whole so-called healing journey of trying to heal AIDS and all this nonsense that a lot of people who have quote-unquote AIDS go through. So he was totally disillusioned. He was just absolutely disillusioned about everything. He was a special dude to be around with, because there was a genuine soberness with a morosity associated to it. It wasn't totally genuine, but there was something sincere. And we were sitting down one day, and I'm a full-fledged heterosexual, right? And I'm hanging out with this dude sitting in my place. We had some Egyptian rug that was there. I remember it because I remember the rug. And we were having a chit-chat, and it wasn't a chit-chat at this point anymore. It was a heart-to-heart talk. And I was telling him, as all this was dawning on me, and I was getting off of my multiple trips, right? And I was like landing into incarnating this, like I'm genuinely intimidated by sexual power. And I said this to him, and he looked at me and says, I know exactly what you mean. Me also. Now this is a full-fledged homo who lived the homo life, but that was his way of dealing with sexuality, right? So we had a meeting point. Because I don't buy into homosexual nothing, right? A person may have a certain kind of behavior. He's a homosexual, I don't care, right? Everybody, he's a man, he has sexuality, and how he deals with his sexuality and how I deal with my sexuality. I dealt with it in a particular kind of way. He dealt with it in a particular kind of way, which is called homosexuality, but not in my book, just so that we're clear how I think, right? And we were at a meeting point where both of us had the humility and the sobriety, I don't know if we can use the word like this, to say, this is really something. So that means the compensations are gone, the mind trips are gone, the delirium is gone, the hype is gone. You're just like coming down into yourself, coming down into your pelvis, starting to feel that power, and you realize, this is a dragon. And it scares the shit out of me because I don't understand it. The world is terrified of it. Nobody really wants to talk about it. Nobody teaches you how to ride that dragon, how to tame the dragon, how to channel the dragon, and all its actions, you have to pay the price. And that's the truth. Action comes from that generative power. So we live in the world of action-reaction, and it comes from there. You generate action from that basic energy, and everything that happens to you, supposedly good or supposedly bad, comes from that place. And most people are living totally unconsciously and are following dictates of their minds and have no idea how their sexual energy is being used. On top of that, we add society, mind conditioning, transgenerational conditioning, cultural condition for thousands of years that is hacking into that power, enslaving you so that you behave in a particular kind of way. It's a deep ass fucking rabbit hole if you have the guts to even consider it. So, all this to say, we had this little juncture in time where we met. Ironically, I think after that, we had a fall off because I told him my truth and he got upset at me because he was expecting me to be gentle and I was just like straight up. A little too straight up for him. Then he went about his business, and I think maybe a year or two later, his sister called me and says, homeboy is dead. I'm like, ah. So that's not the point of the story that he's dead. The point of the story is that to be intimidated in front of a power is a sign of intelligence. It's a sign of humility, meaning you're intelligent. That's what humility means for me. Intelligence, when something is greater than you, you humble. Humble means you understand that it's bigger than you. That's what humble means. And that's when wisdom starts to arise. So now you can make a decision. Well, what are you going to do? Maybe I don't want to deal with this. That's your choice. Maybe I want to continue to compensate. Maybe I want to learn how to master sexuality in a specific, right? And in my case, I'm like, no. I want to master that power. Whatever that means and whatever that takes. Remember, so I said sexuality is death. I want to master death. You don't think, I want to master death. You say you want to master sexuality. And then it opens into a universe of people who speak of mastering sexuality, and then you have multi-orgasms. Notice how it's shallow suddenly, back to stupid land. So anyways, there's everything you want in this day and age, but this is not, how to make the green circulation. No, that's not, it's too much at the surface for me. Anyways, that put me on a path. And that's, on my bio, I said, this is the goddess, this is where the goddess begins. The study of the goddess. Because that's the essence of tantra. Tantra, as far as I understand it, because you have geeks everywhere on earth, they abound, don't they? It's a discovery of life in its totality, starting with, well, what you have, which is your human body, which is the temple of life, and not dismissing any power, and discovering how all of this comes together perfectly harmonized with the thread of a golden thread at the very center that puts it all together. Long story short, when I began to have genuine interest in discovering what sexuality is and not live in a compensational world, then I was brought on a path and an initiatic journey began.